The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Princess Charlotte stood beside her brothers, Prince George and Prince Louis, waiting for the ceremonial guard change to begin. At 9 years old, Charlotte had attended dozens of royal events, but today felt different. The crowd gathered behind the iron gates was larger than usual, their phones held high to capture every moment of the young royals' appearance. Charlotte adjusted the collar of her navy blue coat, her eyes scanning the perfectly lined rows of guards in their iconic red uniforms and bearskin hats. She had always been fascinated by these soldiers, not just for their striking appearance, but for what they represented. Her father had told her stories about their training, their dedication, and the pride they took in protecting the royal family. The ceremony began with the familiar sound of marching, boots striking stone in perfect unison. The guards moved with mechanical precision, their faces stern and expressionless beneath their towering hats. Charlotte watched intently, noticing details that others might miss. The slight adjustment of a rifle strap, the almost imperceptible communication between officers through subtle gestures, the way their eyes remained fixed forward despite the chaos of camera flashes and excited whispers from the crowd. Prince George stood straight beside her, doing his best to maintain the formal posture expected of a future king. Prince Louis, younger and more restless, shifted from foot to foot, occasionally tugging at his mother's hand, but Charlotte remained perfectly still, her attention completely absorbed by the guards and their intricate routine. As the ceremony reached its midpoint, something unexpected happened. One of the younger guards, positioned near the front of the formation, stumbled slightly as he executed a turn. It was barely noticeable, a tiny misstep that lasted less than a second before he recovered his composure. The crowd didn't react, most of them too busy taking photographs to notice such a minor detail. But Charlotte saw it. More than that, she understood what it meant. She had spent enough time around military personnel to know that such mistakes, however small, could weigh heavily on a soldier's mind. These guards trained for months to achieve perfection, and even the smallest error felt like a significant failure to them. The ceremony concluded with a traditional exchange of duties, and the royal family prepared to return inside the palace. This was typically when they would wave politely to the crowd and disappear behind the massive doors. Maintaining the formal distance expected of royalty, the crowd began to disperse, satisfied with their glimpses and photographs of the young princes and princess. Charlotte, however, had other plans. As her brothers began walking toward the palace entrance with their parents, she suddenly turned back toward the guards. Her security detail immediately tensed, unsure of what the young princess intended to do. Protocol dictated that interaction with the guards during official ceremonies was highly unusual, especially initiated by such a young member of the royal family. Before anyone could stop her, Charlotte walked directly toward the guard who had stumbled. Her small frame looked even tinier next to the tall soldier in his formal uniform. The crowd, which had started to leave, suddenly stopped and turned back. Phones were raised again, everyone wondering what Princess Charlotte was doing. The guard remained at attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead as protocol required. He couldn't acknowledge her presence or break his stance no matter who stood before him. But Charlotte could see the tension in his jaw, the slight uncertainty in his otherwise rigid posture. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he couldn't possibly ignore her presence, yet respectful enough to maintain appropriate distance. Then, in a voice loud enough for nearby observers to hear, but gentle enough to convey sincerity, Charlotte spoke. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight that no one in the crowd expected from someone so young. The guards within earshot, still maintaining their formal positions, couldn't hide the slight reaction that flickered across their faces. Even the most disciplined soldiers couldn't completely mask their surprise at what the 9-year-old princess had just said. The palace press secretary, standing nearby with the other royal staff, felt her heart skip a beat. This wasn't part of the planned schedule. Royal children were carefully prepared for public appearances, their interactions scripted and supervised. Whatever Charlotte had just said, it was entirely her own decision. Spoken without consultation or approval from anyone, the crowd's murmur grew louder as people strained to hear what had been said, those closest whispering to those behind them. Camera operators adjusted their equipment, hoping their microphones had captured the moment. News photographers clicked frantically, knowing they were witnessing something unusual, something that would likely make headlines around the world. Charlotte's mother, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, moved forward instinctively, her practiced smile barely concealing her concern about what her daughter might do next. William stood beside her, pride and apprehension mixing on his face as he watched his daughter take initiative in such a public setting. They had always encouraged their children to be confident and compassionate. But this spontaneous moment was testing the boundaries of royal protocol in ways they hadn't anticipated. The guard Charlotte addressed remained perfectly still, but those watching closely could see his eyes glistening slightly, the only sign that her words had reached him. Around him, his fellow guards maintained their positions, but the atmosphere had shifted. Something profound had just occurred, something that transcended the formal ceremony and rigid protocols that usually governed such events. As Charlotte turned to walk back toward her family, the crowd erupted in applause. It started with a few scattered claps, but quickly grew into sustained appreciation. People weren't just clapping for the princess. They were acknowledging the humanity she had just displayed, the compassion that had moved her to break protocol for the sake of kindness. The news of Charlotte's unexpected comments spread through social media within minutes. Videos from multiple angles began appearing online, each one capturing the moment from different perspectives. Royal correspondents scrambled to confirm exactly what the princess had said. While speculation ran wild across various platforms, the palace's communication team found themselves in an unusual position, unsure whether to address the incident officially or allow it to develop naturally. Back inside Buckingham Palace, the family gathered in one of the private sitting rooms. Charlotte sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, aware that her actions had created some sort of commotion, but not entirely certain whether she had done something wrong. Her parents exchanged glances, silently communicating in the way that couples do after years of partnership and shared responsibility. William spoke first, his voice gentle but seeking to understand his daughter's motivation. He asked Charlotte why she had decided to approach the guard, especially without discussing it with anyone first. Charlotte looked up at her father with those clear, honest eyes that reminded him so much of his own mother, and explained that she had simply wanted the soldier to know that everyone makes mistakes, and that one small error didn't diminish the incredible precision and dedication he had demonstrated. Throughout the entire ceremony, Catherine sat beside her daughter, placing a comforting hand on Charlotte's shoulder. She asked what exactly Charlotte had said to the guard. Charlotte repeated her words clearly, without embarrassment or uncertainty. She had told the guard that he had performed brilliantly, and that she hoped he wouldn't feel badly about the tiny stumble because nobody else had even noticed, and she thought he was wonderful at his job. The room fell silent for a moment. Both parents realized that their daughter's instinct had been purely compassionate, entirely focused on making another person feel better rather than drawing attention to herself. This wasn't a child seeking the spotlight or trying to be clever. This was genuine empathy translated into spontaneous action. George, sitting across from his sister, spoke up unexpectedly. He admitted that he hadn't even noticed the guard stumble and asked Charlotte how she had seen something so small in such a large ceremony. Charlotte explained that she'd been watching all the guards carefully, noticing how hard they worked to maintain perfection, and that was why she had spotted the tiny mistake that seemed to bother the soldier, even though it was barely visible. Prince Louis, too young to fully grasp the complexity of the situation, simply stated that he thought Charlotte had been nice to the soldier and didn't understand why everyone seemed so concerned. His innocent observation brought smiles to the adults' faces, highlighting the simplicity of kindness that sometimes gets complicated by protocols and procedures. The king, Charlotte's grandfather, arrived at the sitting room shortly after. Having heard about the incident from his private secretary, his expression was serious as he entered, and Charlotte felt a flutter of nervousness. She had always wanted to make her grandfather proud, and the thought that she might have disappointed him bothered her more than any other consequence. But as the king sat down and asked to hear the full story directly from Charlotte, his stern expression gradually softened. He listened carefully as she explained her reasoning, never interrupting or judging. When she finished, he was quiet for several long moments, his experienced eyes studying his young granddaughter, with an intensity that made her squirm slightly in her seat. Then, unexpectedly, the king smiled. It wasn't his formal public smile, but the genuine warmth he reserved for private family moments. He told Charlotte that what she had done demonstrated exceptional emotional intelligence and courage. He explained that while royal protocol existed for important reasons, compassion should never be sacrificed entirely for the sake of procedure. Her instinct to offer encouragement to someone who might be feeling badly about themselves showed the kind of leadership quality that the monarchy needed. However, he also gently explained that in the future, particularly during formal ceremonies, it would be better to discuss such impulses with her parents first, not because her instinct was wrong, because spontaneous actions during official events could sometimes create complications that a 9-year-old might not anticipate. Charlotte nodded seriously, understanding that her grandfather wasn't scolding her, but rather teaching her about the balance between compassion and responsibility. Outside the palace walls, the story continued to grow. News outlets around the world picked up the footage, and royal commentators offered various interpretations of what had transpired. Some praised Charlotte for her empathy and spontaneity, while others questioned whether such informal interactions were appropriate during ceremonial occasions. Social media divided into camps, debating everything from modern royal protocol to the psychology of child behavior in public settings. The British military community had its own reaction. Retired officers and active soldiers began commenting online, many expressing appreciation for Charlotte's gesture. Several veterans shared their own experiences of making mistakes during ceremonies and the psychological weight such moments carried. Even years later, they noted that acknowledging the humanity of soldiers while respecting their professionalism was a delicate balance, and Charlotte seemed to have struck it naturally. The specific guard whom Charlotte had addressed became the subject of intense speculation. The palace refused to identify him, protecting his privacy and maintaining the tradition that guards represent the institution rather than individual personalities. This anonymity only increased public curiosity, with various people claiming to have identified him through careful analysis of the ceremony footage within the guard regiment itself. Word spread quickly about what had happened. Soldiers who had been present during the ceremony shared their perspectives with their colleagues. The guard in question received both teasing and genuine support from his fellow soldiers, who understood the mixed emotions such a public moment might create. His commanding officers spoke with him privately, ensuring he understood that the incident reflected positively on both him and the princess, demonstrating that even the most formal military settings could accommodate moments of human connection. As evening fell over London, the palace communication team prepared a brief statement addressing the day's events. They carefully crafted language that acknowledged what had occurred without making it seem more significant than necessary. The statement praised Princess Charlotte's compassionate nature, while reaffirming the importance of ceremonial protocols and the professional excellence of the palace guards. Charlotte herself, after the serious family discussions, returned to more typical childhood activities. She played with her brothers in the palace gardens, did her homework, and prepared for bed according to her usual routine. Yet even as she brushed her teeth and changed into her pajamas, she couldn't stop thinking about the guard and whether her words had truly helped him feel better about his small mistake. The following morning brought unprecedented media attention to the palace. News vans lined the streets outside the gates, reporters eager to follow up on yesterday's story. The incident had struck a chord with the public in ways that typical royal appearances rarely did. It wasn't about fashion choices or formal duties. It was about genuine human kindness, displayed by a child who seemed wise beyond her years. Charlotte woke to find her morning routine slightly disrupted by the ongoing attention. Her protection officers briefed her parents about the media presence outside, and decisions had to be made about her scheduled activities for the day. She was supposed to attend school as usual. Questions arose about whether the increased attention would create difficulties for her. Teachers and classmates in the palace staff quarters, members of the guard regiment who had been present during yesterday's ceremony, found themselves receiving unusual attention from their colleagues. The sergeant major addressed the entire unit during morning briefing, using the incident as a teaching moment about maintaining composure under unexpected circumstances and the importance of professionalism, even when protocols were gently bent by well-meaning royals. The guard whom Charlotte had addressed sat among his peers, listening to the sergeant major's words with mixed emotions. On one hand, he felt embarrassed that his tiny mistake had led to such attention. On the other hand, Princess Charlotte's kindness had genuinely touched him. He had spent the previous evening replaying her words in his mind, amazed that someone so young could demonstrate such perceptive empathy. The palace education coordinator arrived at the family's private quarters to discuss Charlotte's understanding of what had transpired. It was important to ensure that the young princess didn't feel punished for her compassionate instinct while also helping her understand the broader implications of public actions by royal family members. The coordinator brought materials about historical moments when royals had broken protocol for humanitarian reasons, showing Charlotte that she wasn't the first to face this tension between formal expectations and human kindness. Catherine decided that Charlotte should indeed attend school as planned. Keeping her routine normal would send an important message that yesterday's events, while noteworthy, shouldn't dominate her life or transform her into something she wasn't. Charlotte was still a 9-year-old girl who needed education, friendship, and normalcy, despite her royal status at school. Charlotte's teachers had prepared the other students for potential questions about the previous day's events. They emphasized treating Charlotte normally and not overwhelming her with attention. However, as Charlotte entered her classroom, she immediately sensed the difference. Her classmates looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Several approached her during breaks to ask about the incident. Charlotte handled the attention with surprising maturity. She downplayed her actions, explaining simply that she had noticed someone might be feeling badly and wanted to help them feel better. She redirected conversations back to regular topics, asking about her friends' activities and focusing on upcoming school projects. Her teachers observed this with quiet approval, noting how well she balanced her unique position with her desire for ordinary interactions. Meanwhile, at the palace, the king's private secretary received an unusual request. The commanding officer of the guard regiment asked for a private meeting to discuss the previous day's incident. Such requests weren't common, and the secretary carefully scheduled the meeting for that afternoon, ensuring appropriate protocols were followed while accommodating the officer's evident desire to address the situation. Thoughtfully, the meeting took place in one of the palace's formal but comfortable conference rooms. The commanding officer, a decorated veteran with decades of military service, chose his words carefully. He explained that while the guards maintained strict discipline and protocol, they were also deeply moved by Princess Charlotte's gesture. He wanted to ensure that the palace understood the positive impact her actions had on morale within the regiment. More importantly, the officer had a proposal. He suggested that perhaps Princess Charlotte might benefit from a private tour of the guard facilities, where she could learn more about the training, dedication, and humanity of the soldiers she had so perceptively connected with. This wouldn't be a public event, but rather an educational opportunity that might help her understand the full context of ceremonial duties and the people who performed them. The king's private secretary listened carefully, recognizing the thoughtfulness behind the proposal. Such a tour would need careful planning and approval from Charlotte's parents, but it represented an opportunity to transform a spontaneous moment into a meaningful learning experience. The secretary promised to present the idea to the family and discuss potential arrangements if they approved. Back in the staff quarters, the guard whom Charlotte had addressed found himself approached by the regiment's chaplain. The chaplain, experienced in supporting soldiers through various challenges, wanted to ensure the young guard was processing the experience healthily. They spoke privately about the pressure of perfection, the humanity behind the uniform, and the unexpected kindness of a child who had somehow understood what a brief stumble might mean to a dedicated soldier. The guard opened up about his feelings, admitting that he had been devastated by his mistake until Charlotte's words had reframed the entire experience. He explained that he had joined the guards to serve with honor and precision, and any deviation from perfection felt like personal failure. Charlotte's compassion had reminded him that excellence didn't require inhuman perfection, and that acknowledging humanity didn't diminish professionalism. The chaplain listened with practiced empathy, then shared stories of other soldiers who had experienced similar moments throughout the regiment's long history. He explained that the Guards' tradition of stoic professionalism existed, alongside a deep understanding of human vulnerability, and both could coexist without contradiction. Charlotte's intuitive grasp of this balance, despite her young age, demonstrated wisdom that many adults struggled to achieve. As the afternoon arrived, Charlotte returned from school to find her parents waiting with news of the Guard Regiment's proposal. They explained the suggested tour carefully, emphasizing that it would be her choice whether to participate. They wanted her to understand that her spontaneous kindness had opened a door to learning more about the people. She had instinctively tried to help. Charlotte's eyes lit up with genuine interest. She had always been curious about the Guards, fascinated by their precision and dedication. The opportunity to see beyond the ceremony and understand their training and lives appealed to her natural inquisitiveness. She asked thoughtful questions about what such a tour might involve and whether she would be able to speak with actual guards rather than just observing from a distance. William and Catherine exchanged pleased glances, recognizing their daughter's sincere interest rather than mere politeness. They explained that arrangements would take time to organize properly, but if she truly wanted to learn more, they would make it happen. Charlotte's enthusiastic agreement settled the matter, setting in motion plans for an educational experience that would benefit both the young princess and the soldiers she had so thoughtfully acknowledged. 3 weeks later, on a crisp autumn morning, Princess Charlotte arrived at the Wellington barracks accompanied by her parents and minimal security detail. The palace had deliberately kept the visit private, with no media presence and only essential personnel aware of the scheduled tour. This wasn't about publicity. It was about education and understanding, about bridging the gap between ceremonial formality and human connection that Charlotte had instinctively recognized. The commanding officer greeted the family personally, in his manner professional yet warm. He had planned the tour carefully, wanting to show Charlotte the full spectrum of Guard life from rigorous training to quiet moments of camaraderie. The goal was to help her understand that the soldiers she saw during ceremonies were complete people with hopes, challenges, and the same fundamental humanity she possessed. Charlotte wore practical clothes rather than formal attire, a deliberate choice that her mother had suggested. This wasn't an official royal engagement, but rather a learning experience. And dressing casually helped emphasize the informal nature of the visit. She carried a small notebook, intending to take notes about what she learned, a habit her teachers had encouraged for all educational experiences outside the classroom. The tour began in the training facilities, where Charlotte watched recruits practicing the precise movements that would eventually become second nature. She observed their intense concentration, the way instructors corrected tiny imperfections in posture or timing, and the physical demands of maintaining perfect synchronization. The soldiers trained despite knowing they were being watched by royalty, their dedication to excellence evident in every repeated movement. An instructor explained the training process to Charlotte in terms she could understand. Comparing the discipline required to mastering any difficult skill, he talked about the pride soldiers felt in their precision, but also the reality that mistakes happened and learning from them was part of becoming excellent at any demanding task. Charlotte listened intently, occasionally asking questions that demonstrated her genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Next, they visited the equipment rooms where uniforms and ceremonial gear were maintained with meticulous care. Charlotte learned about the history of the distinctive red tunics and bearskin hats, understanding that she was witnessing the continuation of traditions stretching back centuries. A quartermaster showed her the weight of the equipment soldiers carried during ceremonies, letting her hold a replica rifle so she could appreciate the physical endurance required to stand motionless for extended periods. The weight surprised. She had watched guards stand perfectly still countless times without truly understanding the physical strain involved. Holding the rifle for just a few moments, She gained new appreciation for the strength and stamina required to maintain those positions during lengthy ceremonies. She asked about how soldiers trained to build such endurance, genuinely curious about the preparation behind performances she had previously taken for granted. Then came the most significant part of the visit. Charlotte was introduced to a small group of guards who had volunteered to speak with her about their experiences. The atmosphere was carefully arranged to feel informal, with everyone seated in a comfortable common room rather than standing in formal positions. The commanding officer had specifically chosen soldiers who could articulate the human side of their service while maintaining appropriate respect. For the young princess, among this group was the guard Charlotte had addressed 3 weeks earlier. He had volunteered immediately when asked if he would be comfortable participating in the visit. The commanding officer had hesitated, not wanting to make the soldier uncomfortable, but the guard had insisted. He wanted Charlotte to know how much her spontaneous kindness had meant to him and his colleagues. Charlotte recognized him immediately, despite the casual clothes, rather than ceremonial uniform. Her face brightened with genuine pleasure at seeing him again, and she greeted him with the friendly directness that characterized her personality. The guard, more relaxed in this informal setting, smiled back and thanked her properly for her kindness during the ceremony, something protocol hadn't allowed him to do at the time. The conversation that followed was remarkably natural. The guards spoke honestly about their pride in their service, the challenges of maintaining perfection, and the psychological pressure of knowing that millions of people watch their ceremonies with expectations of flawless performance. They explained that mistakes, however rare and minor, felt magnified by the significance of their role and the personal standards they set for themselves. Charlotte listened without interrupting, her notebook forgotten as she absorbed their words. She asked thoughtful questions about how they handled the pressure, what motivated them to serve, and how they supported each other through challenges. The guards answered candidly, impressed by the depth of her interest and the maturity of her questions. This wasn't a child seeking entertainment, but a young person genuinely trying to understand their experience. One older soldier, a veteran with 15 years of service, shared a story about his own mistake during a ceremony early in his career. He described the crushing disappointment he had felt and the fear that he would be remembered for that one error rather than years of otherwise flawless service. Charlotte asked what had helped him move past those feelings, and he explained that his fellow soldiers had reminded him that one moment didn't define his entire career and that learning from mistakes made soldiers stronger rather than weaker. The guard Charlotte had originally addressed spoke next, his voice steady but emotional. He explained that her words during the ceremony had arrived at precisely the moment he needed to hear them. He had been replaying his stumble obsessively, convinced that he had let down his regiment and embarrassed himself in front of the royal family. Charlotte's spontaneous kindness had reframed everything, reminding him that compassion mattered more than mechanical perfection and that acknowledging human vulnerability didn't diminish professional excellence. Charlotte listened with visible emotion, her eyes reflecting the sincerity of his words. She explained with touching honesty that she had simply wanted him to feel better because she could see he was upset about something that seemed so small compared to everything he had done correctly. She hadn't thought about protocol or consequences. She had just seen another person hurting and wanted to help. William, observing from the side of the room, felt immense pride in his daughter. This conversation demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership quality he hoped all his children would develop: the ability to see beyond surfaces and titles, to the fundamental humanity connecting all people, regardless of their roles or positions. The commanding officer, also listening carefully, recognized that this exchange transcended typical royal visits. Something authentic was happening here, a genuine connection between a young princess and the soldiers sworn to protect her family. This wasn't about ceremony or tradition, but about mutual respect and shared humanity. As the informal discussion continued, Charlotte asked if she could try on a bearskin hat, curious about what it felt like to wear the iconic headpiece. The guards exchanged amused glances, and with the commanding officer's permission, they produced a smaller ceremonial hat that had been used for training purposes. Charlotte stood still as they carefully placed it on her head, and her immediate reaction was surprise at the unexpected weight. The hat was far heavier than she had imagined, and maintaining balance while wearing it required conscious effort. She stood there for several moments, trying to imagine standing perfectly still for an hour or more with this weight on her head. While executing precise movements and maintaining absolute composure, the physical reality of what she had watched countless times suddenly became tangible, and her respect for the guards deepened even further. The soldiers laughed good-naturedly as Charlotte wobbled slightly, one of them joking that she was doing better than many recruits on their first attempt. Charlotte grinned at this, appreciating being treated normally rather than with excessive deference. She asked how long it took to become accustomed to the weight, and the guards explained the gradual process of building neck strength and balance that allowed them to wear the hats as if they weighed nothing. After removing the hat, Charlotte spent time examining the intricate details of the guards' ceremonial uniforms. She learned about the significance of various insignia, the history behind specific design elements, and the pride soldiers took in maintaining their appearance to exacting standards. Each brass button had to shine perfectly, every piece of equipment positioned precisely, creating a visual representation of excellence that required constant attention. The quartermaster showed Charlotte the detailed checklist guards used before ceremonies, demonstrating how many individual elements required inspection and perfection. She counted more than 40 separate items that had to be verified before a soldier was considered ready for duty. This methodical approach to preparation impressed her, revealing the invisible work behind the ceremonies that spectators never witnessed. Catherine watched her daughter's engagement with quiet satisfaction. This visit was providing exactly the kind of education that schools couldn't offer, teaching Charlotte about dedication, professionalism, and the human beings behind formal roles. These lessons would serve her well throughout her life as she navigated her own position within the royal family and the expectations that came with it. The tour moved to the guards' dining facility, where Charlotte joined the soldiers for refreshments. This casual setting allowed for even more relaxed conversation, with guards sharing stories about their backgrounds, what had motivated them to join the regiment, and what they hoped to achieve in their military careers. Charlotte learned that the guards came from diverse backgrounds across the United Kingdom. United by their commitment to excellence and service, one young guard, only a few years older than Charlotte's brother George, spoke about how watching the ceremony as a child had inspired him to join the guards when he came of age. He described the pride his family felt seeing him in uniform, and how that pride motivated him to maintain the highest standards. Charlotte asked if he ever got nervous during ceremonies, and he admitted that he did, especially knowing that millions might be watching any given performance. This admission surprised Charlotte. She had assumed that the guards' apparent confidence meant they never experienced nervousness or self-doubt. Learning that they felt the same anxieties as anyone else, while still performing with such precision, taught her that courage didn't mean absence of fear, but rather the ability to perform excellently despite it. This lesson resonated deeply with her own experiences. Of nervous moments during public appearances, the conversation shifted to lighter topics as the soldiers shared humorous stories from their training and service. Charlotte laughed genuinely at their tales, enjoying the camaraderie and discovering that these formal figures she had watched from a distance had the same sense of humor and joy as anyone else. The guards appreciated her laughter, pleased that she felt comfortable enough to relax completely in their presence. As the visit progressed toward its conclusion, the commanding officer presented Charlotte with a small gift on behalf of the regiment. It was a miniature replica of the guard's ceremonial uniform, carefully crafted to museum-quality detail. He explained that they wanted her to have something to remember this visit, and to remind her of the connection she had established between the royal family and the soldiers who served them. Charlotte accepted the gift with genuine delight, examining the tiny uniform with fascination. She thanked the commanding officer and all the guards present, her words simple but heartfelt. She explained that this visit had taught her so much more than she had expected, and that she would never watch a ceremony the same way again. Now understanding the dedication and humanity behind every perfectly executed movement, the guard she had originally addressed stepped forward with something in his hand. He had brought his own small gift, a photograph taken during the ceremony where Charlotte had spoken to him. The image had been captured by one of the official palace photographers and showed Charlotte, looking up at him with concern and compassion clear on her young face. He had requested a copy and wanted her to have one as well. Explaining that this moment had become deeply meaningful to him, Charlotte accepted the photograph carefully. Studying the image that captured the spontaneous kindness that had started everything, she looked at the guard with understanding beyond her years and told him that she hoped he would remember their conversation today whenever he thought about that ceremony. She wanted him to remember not the tiny stumble, but rather his years of excellent service and the pride his regiment had in his dedication. The guard's eyes became misty, and he struggled briefly with emotion before regaining his composure. He thanked Charlotte formally, his voice carrying genuine gratitude, and told her that knowing her would influence how he approached his service going forward. He would carry her reminder about compassion and humanity alongside his commitment to professional excellence, understanding that both could coexist beautifully as the visit concluded and farewells were exchanged. Charlotte felt changed by the experience. She had arrived curious and left with profound understanding. These weren't just ceremonial figures or symbolic protectors, but real people with dreams, vulnerabilities, and the same fundamental desire to do well and be valued that motivated everyone. Regardless of their position or title, William and Catherine gathered their daughter for the journey back to the palace. Noting the thoughtful expression on her face, they asked what she was thinking about, and Charlotte explained that she was processing everything she had learned. She felt grateful for the opportunity, but also slightly overwhelmed by the responsibility of her position and the importance of seeing people clearly rather than just seeing their roles. The private car wound through London streets as Charlotte sat quietly, the miniature uniform and photograph carefully cradled in her lap. Her parents respected her contemplative mood, recognizing that she was integrating significant new understanding into her worldview. These quiet processing moments were important, allowing experiences to settle into lasting wisdom rather than remaining superficial encounters quickly forgotten. Back at the palace, news of the visit remained strictly private. The palace communications team had deliberately not publicized the tour, wanting to protect its educational purpose from being transformed into a public relations opportunity. Charlotte's authentic learning mattered more than generating positive media coverage, though they recognized that the story might eventually emerge through less official channels that evening. Charlotte asked if she could write thank you notes to the guards she had met. Her mother provided her with appropriate stationery. Charlotte spent careful time composing individual messages to each person. She avoided generic statements, instead referencing specific conversations and moments that had meant something to her. Her handwriting was still developing the refinement expected of royal correspondence, but her sincerity transcended any technical imperfections. The guard she had originally addressed received a particularly thoughtful note. Charlotte wrote about how meeting him properly and hearing his perspective taught her important lessons about compassion, resilience, and the complexity of balancing high standards with self-forgiveness. She hoped their paths would cross again during future ceremonies, and that, when they did, they would both remember this connection that transcended protocol and formality. As Charlotte sealed the envelopes, she felt satisfied with her messages. Writing them had helped her organize her thoughts about the visit and had provided closure to the experience that had begun 3 weeks earlier with a spontaneous comment during a ceremony. She had learned that simple kindness could ripple outward in unexpected ways, touching lives and creating connections that enriched everyone involved. The following morning, Charlotte attended school with renewed perspective. When her teacher asked students to share recent meaningful experiences, Charlotte spoke briefly about visiting the guards and what she had learned about dedication and humanity. She carefully avoided making the story about herself, instead focusing on the soldiers' commitment and the importance of seeing beyond appearances to understand people fully. Her classmates listened with interest, asking questions that Charlotte answered thoughtfully. Several students commented that they had never thought about the guards as individual people with their own stories and challenges. Charlotte's experience had indirectly educated her peers as well, spreading understanding beyond just her own development. Her teacher recognized this as exactly the kind of learning she hoped all students would embrace. Meanwhile, the guards who had participated in Charlotte's visit found themselves reflecting on the experience as well. The commanding officer noted positive changes in morale and a renewed sense of purpose among the soldiers. They had been reminded that their service mattered not just symbolically but personally, that they protected real people who cared about them as individuals rather than just appreciating them as ceremonial figures. The guard Charlotte had first addressed discovered that sharing his vulnerability during the visit had strengthened rather than weakened his standing among his peers. Other soldiers approached him to discuss their own experiences of mistakes and recovery, creating conversations that might not have happened without Charlotte's initial compassion opening the door. The regiment's culture subtly shifted toward acknowledging humanity alongside excellence. Weeks passed, and life returned to normal rhythms for everyone involved. Charlotte continued her education, attended various royal functions, and grew an understanding of her position and responsibilities. She didn't speak publicly about the guard visit, respecting the private nature of the experience, but the lessons she had learned influenced her approach. To all interactions with people who served the royal family in various capacities, during a Christmas ceremony at the palace, Charlotte found herself once again watching the guard change. This time, she knew many of the soldiers by name, understanding their individual stories behind the uniform precision. She noticed subtle details that others missed, recognizing signs of concentration or slight adjustments that the guards made to maintain perfection throughout the lengthy ceremony. When one guard caught her eye briefly, she saw him smile almost imperceptibly before returning to his formal expression. She realized it was the soldier she had originally addressed, now back on ceremonial duty. No words were exchanged, but understanding passed between them. He was telling her that he was fine, that he carried her kindness with him, that her spontaneous compassion continued to matter months after it had been offered. Charlotte smiled back just as briefly, a tiny acknowledgement that wouldn't be noticed by cameras or crowds, but meant everything to the two people sharing it. Then she returned her attention to the ceremony, watching with appreciation for both the precision and the humanity that created such magnificent traditions. The media had eventually learned about Charlotte's visit to the guard barracks, though details remained limited due to the palace's protective approach to the princess's private educational experiences. The story was reported as another example of the young royal's compassionate nature. Though journalists lacked the intimate details that would have made the full story even more compelling, public opinion about Charlotte continued to be overwhelmingly positive. People appreciated her apparent authenticity and kindness, seeing in her a hopeful vision of the monarchy's future. She seemed to understand instinctively the balance between maintaining tradition and acknowledging humanity, between respecting protocol and prioritizing compassion when circumstances called for it within the royal family. Charlotte's actions had sparked quiet discussions about preparing the younger generation for their roles. Her spontaneous kindness had demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful royal moments emerged not from carefully planned appearances, but from authentic human connections. This understanding influenced how William and Catherine continued to raise their children, encouraging compassion and situational awareness alongside protocol education. The king spoke with Charlotte privately several months after the original incident, asking what she had learned from the entire experience. Charlotte thought carefully before responding, then explained that she had learned that kindness was never wrong, even when it broke protocol, that people deserved to be seen as complete humans rather than just roles, and that sometimes the most important actions were the unplanned, ones that came from genuine care for others. Her grandfather listened with visible pride. Recognizing wisdom that many people took decades to develop, he told Charlotte that she reminded him of his own mother, great-grandmother, who had possessed similar intuitive understanding of people and situations. He explained that this quality would serve her well throughout her life and that she should trust her compassionate instincts while also